Welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis.
Hi, Bill Ellis, your host at What's the Point? Another episode and another terrific guest. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that all of us struggle with at times, and that's very simply to figure it out. What does it take to figure it out? And that can cover any number of things. My guest today, Derrick Girard, has gone through quite a bit in his life that he's had to figure out. It's resulted in him writing a very interesting book called Put to the Test. He is a veteran, he is an entrepreneur, and he is a man who very often is summed up in one word, which is persistence. Derrick, hello. Thank you for being here.
Bill, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be terrific. I'm very happy to have you here in this topic because figuring it out is something that we all struggle with and that we can all use help with. So let us hear your overview of figure it out. And I know it's not necessarily a quick soundbite, but tell us what you mean by figure it out.
Well, I think it's a mindset that a lot of people, in fact, I think everybody has this mentality of how to figure things out, how to persevere, how to get things done and power through. I think it's one of those things that you don't really understand how you view that internally until you're put to the test, until something drastic happens in your life or something really challenges you that you really figure, you find out for yourself, how adept am I at actually sorting through chaos and confusion and getting things done. I think for a lot of people, the term figure it out is used almost as like a not my problem. Somebody else will take care of it. They'll say things like, you figure it out. In reality, what I wanted to talk about in the book and what I've been through is what do you do when nobody else is going to do that? And that's that figure it out mindset, that mantra that I love to share and I think I've sort of epitomized over the course of my life.
And when you say when you face that situation that, no one else is going to do that, I'm going to read into that you mean it's something that needs to be or could be or should be done, yes?
Yes, 100%. Yep.
So share with us, Derrick, your experience. Give us the overview of how you evolved to this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it started for me as a kid growing up in the military. I was an Army brat all over the world. And so constant change, constant chaos, and you kind of get used to living in that world. And then growing up myself, not as a very good student, figuring out how to become a good student after I joined the military myself and moving into the professional world, all of that sort of chaos and winding road led me down this path of creating a technology company. And my background wasn't in technology, Bill. So I was a financial advisor. I was a consultant for advisors. But I found a technology problem. There was something that I needed, and I knew everybody in my, in the industry that I was in needed this as well. And nobody else was solving it. Nobody else was going to do it. And so I said, that's it. I have to solve this problem. I have to figure it out. And so I did. And as I did that, everything began going really well. And then right when that happened, it was like the wheels fell off. So, business dispute with my partner. I get surprised with a lawsuit from a competitor. So in a matter of 6 months, I go from everything is just finally taking off to, here you go, Derrick, here's 3 lawsuits you have to deal with all on your own while you're trying to grow this company, while you're trying to do all these great things and be a husband and a father. Now, what are you going to do? And so that's when all of this was really put to the test. And as I was writing the book, it was very much like, here's the most recent example, but here's a whole series of life examples I've been through that led me to this point.
That's what I'd like to hear about. We'll come back to the lawsuits and the IT company that you started. Also being a Army dependent and traveling the world in the constant chaos, I can certainly relate to what you're talking about. Where throughout that, at what point did you develop, or were you aware that you developed this got to get it done kind of an attitude?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you when it happened as a kid. One of the examples I write about in the book is I was going into 4th grade. So, 10, 12 years old, or and not even that old, younger than that. But I was going into 4th grade when my family moved to Panama. And I remember my mother leaving me at the airport with all of the family's luggage while she went to find my dad. And it was just me sitting there amongst all these strangers as a young kid. And it was like, all right, well, I didn't ask to be put here, but somebody had to guard the luggage. Somebody had to stay here, and it was me. And so that's just an example of being a young child where it was like, all right, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle this? Are you going to make excuses? Are you going to cry? Are you going to whine? Are you going to complain? That doesn't solve the problem. So here is the situation at hand. So it's hard for me to say, like, here's the exact moment I realized it, but it's just a series of events over the course of my life that I look back to and go, yeah, it was sort of building the entire time.
So it sounds like it was very environmentally driven. I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is also a bit of influence from the military attitude of your father help drive that drive. So you advanced through the military, and you were Air Force?
I was Air Force, yet my dad was Army.
Okay. And tell me just briefly about your service, and thank you for that.
Yeah, so when I decided to join the military, I decided I wanted to join the reserves so I could go to school. And my dad, being 20 years active duty, when I came home one day and said, I'm going to join, the military to help pay for school, his first words were, "You're joining the Air Force." He didn't even let me consider any other branch. And I thank him for that, because that was a pretty interesting observation that he made based on his experience. But I was a fuels specialist in the Air Force. So, I refueled airplanes, which was a fantastic job. And I loved every minute of it, and had a couple of deployments along the way, which was a pretty interesting experience as well. But that allowed me to go to school and do the things that I wanted to do later on in life.
Great segue, because the next thing I was going to ask you about is what did you choose, or what did you think, or when did you clarity on what it was you wanted to do after the military?
It was kind of dumb luck, to be honest with you. I just returned from a deployment, and I had messed my back up pretty bad on this deployment. And the Air Force kind of got tired of me not listening, because they kept telling me you needed to be on restriction, you not to work. And I just ignored them and kept working, because, again, sitting in bed doesn't solve anything. I'm just going to go work. And so they put me in family services and told me, you need to help people that are going through different struggles and different things like that. And I just basically sat around solving problems all day. And it was at that point in time when I realized, I think I want to go into this financial advisor, financial planner space, so I can do that for a living and help people solve problems and navigate difficult things. And that's what led me down the path of the financial services industry.
I think what I'm hearing in your comment about the military and not listening is, first of all, a bit of a rebellious streak, which I can also relate to.
Yep.
But let me ask you to clarify your thoughts on sitting around doesn't solve anything. Does it not solve your healing and allowing your body and your back to heal? So I'm not. What I'd like is clarification on at what point do you, in your experience, determine that I've sat around long enough to give my body the chance to heal, yet I need to move on? At what point were you confident enough that doing things that were tangible, that you could see the results, outweighed what you can't see, and that's the healing of your body?
Yeah. It was difficult for me when in this scenario, when I messed my back up, because I couldn't explain to you how I messed it up, and nobody could explain what was wrong with it. And so that was the hardest part for me, being on a deployment, where I was in constant pain, but nobody could understand why. Nobody could understand where it was coming from or how it was being generated. And so for me, I just don't sit still very well. And so it was like, all right, well, if the doctors don't know how it happened and they don't know how it's going to make it any worse, I'm just going to work, because the work needs to be done. There was so much that needed to be done. So for me at that point, being young, it was just being stubborn. It was just not, at that point, not really understanding the long-term ramifications of maybe not taking it as easy as I should. But still to this day, I deal with tremendous back pain. And again, 20 some years of medical tests and doctors, and still nobody can tell me why or where it came from or why I deal with it. So I just deal with it still to this day, and I move on. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. I just deal with it.
I'm sorry to hear that you're in constant pain. I know many people that share that situation, and I know it's difficult. But let me use that example just as a segue to get back to the IT company and the lawsuits you faced, I think that there is a great lesson there in the balance between getting things done and not making excuses and accepting things that, for the time being anyway, can't be changed or should be accepted. So as we talk today, I'd like you to build on that, because I think that there is reason to always say, no, I'm making an excuse, I can't do that. But I think there's also an opportunity and a time when we have to say, this is just the way it is for right now.
Yep.
Expand on that, would you please?
Yeah, and I think you'll find that personally and professionally. I think people will find those scenarios all the time. And what I always say to anybody who feels like they've ran into that wall where this is just sort of an insurmountable problem is, did you really try everything to find out if there was a solution? And this is where you have to be honest with yourself. So again, for me, when I ran into this, deciding to build a tech company, I exhausted every possible scenario that wouldn't lead me down the path of having to solve it myself. And what I found was that everybody else felt like that wall was insurmountable. There's just no way to get around it, get over it, get through it. It's just not possible. Nobody's done it. Therefore, it's not possible. And that led me down a different path of, well, what would it take for it to be possible? The answer could very well have been, it's just not possible, right? But I was going to make sure I did my own due diligence and homework there. And so for me, anytime somebody feels like they're there, it really comes down to, all right, well, what did you do to really make that determination? And I think in most scenarios, in my experience, it's not insurmountable. Sometimes it's more difficult. Sometimes it's more challenging. Sometimes it requires a completely different train of thought. Again, I'm not a tech guy and I built a tech company. So I had to completely change everything because everybody in the financial services industry thought it was insurmountable. But it wasn't a financial service industry problem. It was a tech problem.
Okay.
And so it really comes down to, did you really try everything to make sure this is insurmountable? That is really important, I think, in personal relationships. Right? When marriages fail and all these different things go on, is it because it's insurmountable or is it because you just refuse to approach the problem from a different angle? And I don't know. It's in my opinion, the way I choose to view things, most things aren't insurmountable. They just require a different way of thinking.
To get that different way of thinking, did you avail yourself of what I'll call a trusted advisor or people that you felt could help you get that different perspective? Because in my experience, oftentimes we aren't myopic necessarily, but our experience doesn't allow us to look at things perhaps beyond a certain set of parameters. Did you have someone that you went to to talk things through and to work it out with you?
Over the course of my life, yes, different people here and there. Again, I'm one of those guys that is sort of crazy enough to think I can do anything and smart enough to figure it out. I do a lot of electrical work and plumbing work, and I do a lot of remodeling and building things with my hand. I've had no training in any of that. But over the course of my life, I found people that did and leveraged them for their expertise, asked them a lot of very good questions and learned and really paid attention to what they do and how they do things. Professionally, I've been able to surround myself with a lot of people that are much smarter than me, much more successful than me. And I just pick and choose how I choose to engage with these people and what I learn from them. I ask really good questions. I apply what I'm taught and what I see, and that's it. I just move forward in that way. So I can't say like there's one person in particular that, I read this or did this, but it's just a sort of a combination of all of it. And I think the other thing which is really important is reading. Somebody said to me many, many years ago, the difference between the person you are today and the person you'll be in the future are the people you meet and the books you read. And when he said that to me, I was young and naive and I didn't really understand it. And then I started reading. And then I'm going, this is amazing. The little things you pick up from all these different books that are it's just remarkable. And I think that is a massive opportunity for a lot of people as you start to reframe how you think about problem solving is read. Meet great people, ask great questions, and read some books. I think you'll be amazed at what happens.
I agree with both of those, the people you meet and the books you read. And the point that comes from this to me is at some point, in my experience, we do have to sit back and say, I don't have the answers, and I don't want to be at the end of the path of the possibility of whatever it is I'm looking at. So I can rely on things I've learned, experience I've had, things I've read. But there's also times I just flat have to go to someone and say, here's where I am. Is there a path out of this that I've not seen?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the message I want the listeners to get to is if we rely 100% on ourselves, there's a good chance we're going to get to the end of the road as we see it.
Yep.
Without realizing that there's a lot of other ways to either get around the obstacle, over, or through the obstacle. So I do want to just reiterate the importance of gaining insight from people that are trusted and people that can give you advice with your best interest at heart. You mentioned success. Well, before I go to that, close the loop on the 3 lawsuits. How did those turn out? How is that company now? And what did you learn from all of that?
Yeah. Well, real quick, I'm going to take one quick step back and what you had just mentioned about finding those other people. One of the things that I have the luxury of doing now is consulting and working with small businesses and all these different people from all different walks of life. And one of the things that's always interesting to people when they finally start to reach out to somebody for some guidance and some help in different areas that maybe their expertise isn't in, is I think it's always interesting how surprised people are when that right person who's got a bunch of experience and wisdom and knowledge, when they don't give you answers, instead they ask questions. And that's one of the greatest things in the world is that when you go find that person who's got an unbelievable experience, and Bill, you're probably one of them, and somebody says, this is what I'm running into, what do I do now? They ask the question in the way that they want an answer. And the best guidance and the best people don't give you answers, they give you questions. They force you to think. They challenge you to challenge your own perception and your own approach. And when you do that with the right people the right way, it's just amazing the outcome that comes from that versus do this or do that.
I agree with you 100%. And that is, like you said, that's exactly my approach to when I coach and consult. And that is, I'm there, the term I use is to be a thought partner.
Mm-hmm.
It's let me help you work through this and let me bring you some ideas that maybe you haven't had. And let me ask questions that will trigger new thoughts for you and perhaps new avenues to gain new information for you. A phrase I love to use is part of my job is to help people move the flashlight. And what I mean by that is moving the flashlight, looking at the same thing with a different perspective.
Yep.
And that's something that I think we all can benefit from.
Yeah.
So thanks for clarifying that. Now the lawsuits and the company and close that story for me. I'm dying to know.
Yeah, it was crazy. So 3 lawsuits. One of them was a competitor that sued us for patent infringement. One of them was my uncle, who I built this company with, and I was very close with, but all of a sudden one day decided he wanted to assert something that, in my opinion, made no sense. And the third one was an investor who, out of the blue, wanted something completely different than we had agreed to, and I said no. And so one landed on my plate, and all of a sudden the other 2 piled on to see if they could put as much pressure on me to crack and crumble as they possibly could. The growth of the company never seemed to waver. We just continued to grow at an unbelievable rate because the product we built was so much better than anything else on the market. And long story short, my uncle's lawsuit and the investor's lawsuit never went to trial. I never thought they would, but they did last longer than I thought they should have. And they cost a lot more money than I thought they should have. And ultimately, I think we came out in the right spot on that. And the third one actually went to court. The patent case went to court in federal court here in Minnesota. I sat on trial for 8 days, just over 10 hours on the witness stand. And at the end of it all, the jury reached a verdict and said, we agree, Derrick does not infringe on this company's patents. And our counterclaims were that the patents never should have been issued in the first place. And the jury agreed with that as well. So I spent about 3.5 years in litigation, 3.5 years on these lawsuits, millions of dollars in legal fees. And when it was done, the company had grown just tremendously. And I found an opportunity to exit and finally get some sanity back and take a break. And that's what I did. So about 6 months after the lawsuits were over, I sold the company and very shortly thereafter separated and doing other things that enjoy me or that I enjoy doing now.
Okay. Earlier, you talked about success. You talked about how you want to live your life. How do you define a life well lived beyond achievements, beyond I'm going to overcome this and accomplish that?
So it's an interesting question because it's one of the questions that I challenge people with all the time is how do you define success? And for me, success is defined by being able to say yes. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a house of no. I grew up, my parents we didn't have a lot of money. When you're in the military, you don't have a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
We never went on family vacations. We didn't donate to charity. We didn't volunteer our time. We didn't do these things because we didn't have time. We didn't have the resources. We were never in the right locations to do these things. And so for me, my goal for success that has essentially given me the opportunity to work as hard as I have is because I want to say yes. So if somebody wants something, if somebody needs something, if there's an opportunity and somebody is looking for help, I want to be able to say yes. If my family says let's go on a vacation and relax, I want to be able to say yes. If there's another business opportunity that presents itself to me, I want to be in a position where I can say yes. And that to me is success. That's the flexibility that I crave in my life, to be able to pick and choose the things that I think are most important to me at that particular point in time and generally lead the way with yes.
Okay. I like that. It sounds as though you have embraced a pretty well-driven purpose to what you do across all areas. You talk often, Derrick, about excuses don't solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
At what point, if any, does someone have to say, okay, I'm out of excuses, I don't have excuses, but I'm also out of potential solutions. It's time to just walk away, and this is not going to get resolved or accomplished. At what point does that happen?
Yeah, it's a personal position within everybody, personally and professionally, right? I'll give you an example of somebody who's in a job that they're treated terrible, the environment is toxic, whatever it might be, right? There are some points in time, even in relationships, personal relationships that are that way, where you have to move on, right? And so you have to understand at a certain point, I've tried everything. I've tried adapting myself. I've tried approaching the problem a different way. I've tried doing these things. I truly believe I have tried as hard as I can to solve this problem, right? If you can honestly say that and the problem is not getting solved, then you are 100% justified in making a decision to leave. And sometimes the right thing to do is to leave. And I think sometimes people get this idea when I talk about figure it out, that means you never leave. That means you never quit something. No. Sometimes quitting something is the smartest thing in the world you can possibly do. If you've actually given it your all, you've tried your hardest, you've approached it the way you think is the most appropriate, and you still can't get the resolution, you have to leave. That is the right thing to do. So it's impossible to say like, this is what you are looking for. It really comes down to honesty. So if I have a bad relationship with my spouse for whatever reason, am I truly being honest with myself that I'm trying to keep this relationship working, that I'm trying to be a better person and trying to be what this relationship needs? Or am I just resigned to being a stubborn, pain in the butt, and who cares? And that happens a lot. And that's that level of honesty that people have to have that hurts. It's really painful.
It's a level of honesty, and I agree with you, Derrick. It's a level of honesty that we have to have in self-evaluation. I believe that there comes a balance between a battle of ego.
100%.
It's like, I'm going to win this, accomplish this, do this. Otherwise, I'm a failure. And oftentimes, I think we need to be more honest with ourselves. How do you balance the persistence and the resilience that you have with that self-awareness of maybe it's time to reconsider?
Well, first of all, failure is an interesting term, right? I think a lot of people see things as sort of one step forward, two steps back when something doesn't go their way. To me, as long as you're moving forward and you're learning from it, it's never a step back. It's a step forward in another direction. I cite examples in the book of failures that I've had personally and professionally, dumb things that I've done, jobs that I've lost, whatever it might be, that on the outside, you can look at it and say, this was a failure. Even in that point in time, it looked like a failure. But then when you start reflecting and you learn from it, it's not a failure. They're the greatest teaching moments of all time. And so for me, that's a really important term in concept
Mhm.
there. I have been guilty myself of letting my self-confidence cloud self-awareness. And that's what I talk about in the book for failure for me. That's a big reason of the failures I've had in my life, is because to me, I've put too much emphasis on my self-confidence and not enough on my self-awareness. And I think it's one of those things that most of the time it's something that comes with reflection. It's something that comes with perspective. That's when you start to grow that self-awareness even more so. So young people, again, take my military experience, being stubborn, being dumb, being so self-confident, I can do anything. You look back on it as time goes on with every little increment in life, and that's when that awareness starts to build. And so if you don't have it right away, the harder you push yourself, the more you strive to accomplish, the more failure, if you use that term, you have, that will generally give you more self-awareness and perspective that you're going to need to be more successful in life. So I tell everybody, like my kids especially, don't be afraid to fail. Do not be afraid to set your goal and miss it as long as you can learn from it. But you have to give it everything. If you fail without giving it everything, you got to pick yourself back up. If you fail doing everything you possibly can to succeed, I'll be there to pick you up. I'll be there to help you the next time. But if you fail without trying your absolute hardest and you lie to yourself about how hard you committed yourself to something, you got to pick yourself up that time and you're going to learn from it.
Those are important points. Failure is not failure if we learn a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the lesson is I didn't give it my all. Oftentimes the lesson is something else, but we have to learn that lesson. Uh, there's a phrase that I love, and that is, looking back and being self-reflective is to learn the lesson and leave the event.
Yep.
So that we don't stay dwelling on, well, woulda, coulda, shoulda done something differently and this could have happened. Well, no, not if we gave it our all, and not if we learned what could have been different and incorporate that as we move forward.
There's a great quote in a show that my wife and I were just watching. And this one young woman asked her dad a question. She says, how come you're always right? He had said something to her. She didn't think it was going to be true, and it turned out to be true. And this young woman said to her dad in this show, how come you're always right? He said, because I've spent an entire lifetime of being wrong, and I haven't forgot the lessons. And I heard that quote and I went, I don't know who wrote that, but that is such a phenomenal line.
That's one that we should all embrace.
Yep.
That's one we should absolutely all embrace. What is something, we talked about success and looking at people, both in your experience in the military, in your tech company, and the lawsuits and all of that, and now in your consulting business and everything else that you do, which is pretty broad. What's something that most successful people believe that you think is completely wrong?
Oh, that's a great question. What is something that most successful people believe that I think is wrong? I don't know if I'd say most successful people, but I've met many successful people that think they're unique, that think they're special. And I'm somebody who I've experienced setbacks and I've experienced success in my life. And I say to everybody, every time I meet them, I'm not special. There isn't a thing about me that's special. I'm not unique. I'm just not. And so I firmly believe that success is a mindset. Success comes down to how you approach problems and challenges that you face in life, big or small. You don't have to be special to change your mindset. And I think there's some people that think they're special. I think that's one of the hardest things. One of the things I love about doing public speaking now is I've listened to speakers. I've listened to these big names that you have probably heard and everybody else has heard, and they stand up on a stage and they speak at you and you're just in awe, right? You're like, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable, but it's really hard to relate to. And you walk out of a session or whatever, and you don't know how to apply it. And one of the things that's really important to me is making sure everybody understands I've been through some craziness in my life. I'm not special. There isn't a thing about me that's special. And that, I think, is important for people to understand.
Great answer. Speaking about listening to, be it podcast, on-stage speakers, even reading books, to me, what comes into play is basically the question that's the title of my show, and that's what's the point? So we can go in and listen to someone who is engaging, is perhaps the greatest speaker we've ever heard, who has some type of inspirational story, but when it comes to me and relating to it, what's the point? And that has to do with what part of that can I relate to?
Yep.
What part of that can I learn from? Because I certainly can't replicate what they've done. So asking ourselves, what's the point, I think is a critical question. And as I've said many times, it's a question we can't ask ourselves often enough, because once we get to the point of coming up with an answer, then there's something that's behind that. There's the thing behind the thing. So I get what you mean, where being relatable and presenting to people scenarios that they can relate to, that they can learn from, and importantly, that they can implement is critical. And that's one of the reasons I do this show and have people like you on, people that have gone through things that can bring that relevance and bring that thing that my listeners can say, I can relate to that.
Yep.
I can learn from that. I can incorporate that,
Yep.
as opposed to, wow, that's the most amazing story in the history of the world, which is fine, but it's not necessarily all that helpful. You have a very keen self-awareness, Derrick. What is one of your strengths that can become a weakness?
For me, I think the answer to that is simple, and that is my drive. My drive to get things done, my drive to succeed, my drive to accomplish what I set out to accomplish has been both an asset and a liability over the course of my career. And when I say liability, most of what that has cost me is relationships. I was sharing with somebody the other day, his son is in college, and we were just talking about our college experiences. And one of the things I regret is being so focused when I was in school, getting my degrees in time, getting my degrees in 4 years. I double majored. I didn't go out. I didn't party. I didn't go out with my roommates. I just didn't do those things. And as you get out of school, him and I were just chatting about this. I said, I haven't talked to my college roommates or anybody I went to school with once since graduation, because I was so focused on what I was going to do next that I sacrificed all those relationships. Then every point in my career where I've moved up and I've really achieved what I set out to achieve, I'm so focused on that and what's next that I've kind of sacrificed what I've, the people and the relationships that I've had. And so the farther I get in life, I still have some great relationships, but that's cost me a lot over the course of my career.
Realizing that, and tying back to what we talked about earlier in the episode, Derrick, how do you incorporate that awareness now in your current initiatives? And when you are still going to be very driven, that's not going to leave you, I don't believe. But you do have the opportunity to have that awareness and build it into your drive. Have you done that, and how have you done that?
For me, I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I'm definitely more intentional. And so it's one of those things where everybody that's listening to this, you can sit there and listen to, and you can think there's probably somebody that I haven't talked to in a while that I should probably reach out to. And you might be sitting there waiting for them to reach out to you. And that's kind of the way I was, right? Out of sight, out of mind. I'm focused here. And if something's important, they'll reach out to me. Well, for me, I just get more intentional. I reach out to them. I try to stay proactively connected to people in my life because it matters. And it's a personal thing. It matters a lot. Those relationships mean a lot. For somebody like me who grew up the way I grew up, I went to 12 schools before I graduated high school. I don't have friendships from middle school or elementary school. They don't exist, right? And so trying to maintain those relationships that I do have is really important to me personally and professionally. And So for me, I'm just a lot more intentional about it.
I can share the lack of relationships from the time we were young, moving from base to base to base. I couldn't tell you anything about any of my childhood friends.
Yep.
And I think that might be a factor why I value relationships as much as I do today.
Yep.
You talked about the fact that you've become aware of the relationships, and what I want to just throw this out and for your comment, and also hopefully for the listener benefit, and that is we want to change something, right? We listen here, and it's maybe I'll hear something that Derrick says, and I'll be able to change. So, oh, I can't be so driven that I don't value and take advantage of and build relationships. So that's awareness. But
Yep.
for change, and I'm going to narrow this down to three very simple approaches to change. One is awareness. So
Mhm.
people listening might say, I'm the same way. I drive and I don't care about people. Well, that's fine. But then we have to accept that. We have to accept that that's something that we do and something that we're not comfortable with. And then the third key to change is action. And that's what you talked about doing.
Yep.
That is, I'm going to take the time and very proactively build and maintain and try to improve the relationships in my life. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and for me, it started by having other people in my life that they were good at that and they knew I wasn't. So for instance, my wife, and there was a woman that worked for me at my tech company who understood some of those things that were really important. Simple things like wishing employees a happy birthday, right? You get so focused, you don't even pay attention to that, or their anniversaries or things like that. And so I would actively go to these people who were really good at that and say, look, I'm terrible at this. And when I don't acknowledge something as significant as a birthday or an anniversary or something, it makes me look like I don't care. I do. I'm just really bad at stopping and paying attention to that. Can you help me make sure that I don't forget that? Can you help me with reminders? Can you help me with these things? And so I knew I couldn't change myself overnight. So I found other people that could complement me. And that's one of the things that I say all the time about the lawsuits that I went through. The dumbest thing I did was I did it myself. When this happened, I didn't know who in my network I could lean on. I didn't know who in my professional network or personal network I could take this to without being a complete burden to them. And so I did it all on myself, which is insane. Don't do that. I recommend to anybody. It takes a crazy, stubborn, crazy nut person to do that. And I was able to do it because of the way I'm wired, but the stress that it put on me in my life and my family was insane. And when I won the lawsuits and I sold the company and people started hearing about what I went through, they were blown away. People were like, you should have called me. I would have loved to help. I would have loved to have been a sounding board. And you don't realize how important that would have been until you start to realize, man, my network is much greater than I thought, and shame on me for not understanding that.
That is one of the benefits of having strong relationships and building those strong relationships so that we know what they are and who the quote unquote go-to people are in our life when the stuff hits the fan, when things get to the point that we need help, because we can be driven, we can be self-confident, we can also have runaway ego.
Yep.
And that's where we run into issues. We're very, very simply, I've got relationships now that I know if something happens, I know I can pick up the phone.
Yep.
And I know I can text, or I know I can just go knock on their door, that I'll see them anyway, because I see people regularly. That's a key lesson in what you've just said, Derrick. And that's what I talk about, having a thought partner, having trusted advisors, just having people that we're close enough to that we can go to and say, I need help.
Yep.
Or I need insight. Or you know what? Sometimes it's just, I need you to listen.
Yep. Just a vent.
Yeah. And that oftentimes that's a marriage tip for myself and everyone else. You know, when my wife comes to me, sometimes I just have to put the brakes on myself and say, are you looking for input, or would you just like me to listen? And more often than not, it's you just listen. You know, just let me unburden. And that's true in all aspects of life. When you are speaking, when you are consulting, when you're working with other companies, how do you define company culture and how do you help your client companies build or recognize or create that culture?
What a great question. Just over a year ago, I was invited to take a full-time position at a company, and I knew the CEO of the company. And culture, something he spoke about a lot, and trying to fix the culture of the organization. And these people needed to do better here in this department here. And it was a good-sized company, and so they brought me in at this executive level to try to drive growth in the organization and do these things. And it didn't take me long to realize that the culture problem started at the top. It's not that big of a surprise, but this leader was under the impression that the problem was everybody else. And when I got to know everybody else and really started to uncover what was going on, it became crystal clear the problem was not everybody else. And I tried as hard as I could for about 2 months to correct that, and finally realized I can't correct this. There's nothing I can do to correct this person who doesn't think he's the problem. And so I chose to leave. In consulting, for me, one of the things that comes up all the time is culture. And it's not what you say, it's what you do. And that's the difference that I've seen in a lot of these companies. People will say, we put our employees first. Well, let's walk through the actions that you take at the company, right? That was the disconnect with this other company was we're the greatest, where everyone here loves it here. When you talk to them, it's completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't, there's a old thing, right? I don't care what you say. I care what you do. It's the actions that matter. For me, that's what I spend most of my time on in the consulting space is really trying to understand the actions and what people do, how they do it, how they engage, how they respond, and then figuring out from there, what is it that's getting in the way. It's amazing how many times it's something so simple and something so minor. It's just mind blowing. But because people can't get out of their own way, sometimes they can't see it. Right. And so it's amazing to me. Culture is unbelievably important. I think it's misunderstood. I think a lot of people think it's in the core values you put up on the wall or your mission statement you put in your brochure. No, it's really in how you treat people and how people are engaged and how they respond, all that stuff. That's what matters. For me, at my company, we were a small company. Our culture was, how did everybody behave? You had to go above and beyond. You had to do more than what your job description said. You might sometimes have to work evenings and weekends. That was the company. But everybody supported each other. Everybody knew it. We didn't complain about it. Everybody just knew we were in a small company and that's what you have to do. We just had a phenomenal culture, but it didn't start that way. We had to build it. We had to get rid of some people. We had to bring the right people in. That was really important.
The culture definition, you touched on both aspects and my view and my definition of culture, which is very simple. It is core values. It is the company's core values as it is expressed in the behavior of everyone in the company. So I've got a very simple formula that core values times behavior equals culture.
Yep.
So if you don't have core values and don't believe in them and don't have people focus on them and let them know that this is real and why it's real so that they understand it. And then if they don't incorporate that into their behavior on an everyday basis, both their work behavior and how they interact with people, the culture is not going to be good. And a company culture is only as good as the worst employee that delivers on that culture.
Yep.
You talked about the boss, the CEO that would not realize and could not recognize, chose not to recognize that the core issue lied with him. And then you said something that I find very interesting, and it might be a good way to start to end this because we're up against the time that I've asked you for. That's a great example to me of what we talked about earlier of doing everything you can, not having an excuse, but when you hit a dead end, leaving.
Yep.
For you to have accomplished that in 2 months, is that based on your experience and having learned about how far to go and where to realize this isn't an excuse, this is just the end of the road?
Yeah. So similar for me when it came to choosing to build the technology company, I'm just a sponge. I just go and I ask a lot of questions. I seek to understand. I just go out and I try to do that. And in this position that I was in, I did that every day. I talked to people in the field. I talked to people in the home office. I read previous reviews of employees, and you saw these similar patterns over and over and over again, everything pointing back to consistent things. And I would share that consistently and go, here's what we're hearing. Here's what we're seeing. Let's work on fixing this. And the answer was, nope, they're lying. That's not true. And it was, one of those things where I can only bring this to you so many times politely and professionally and ask you to acknowledge its significance. And as time went on, it just went, you know what? There's no way I can get you to change. There's no way I can get you to modify this behavior. And I'm just not going to do this. And I'm not going to, jeopardize my reputation and what I stand for, what matters to me. And that was it. That was just the way it ended. And it needed to end, unfortunately, because I wasn't going to be a part of an environment like that. And I think it was 100% wrong. And I just didn't want to be a part of it.
I think another takeaway from that, is whether it was a direct thought of yours or ancillary thought, I think it also speaks to what you talked about, having discovered the importance of relationships. I mean, you're taking the confidence, asking for the confidence of all of these employees. And if you weren't true to them, that would make a statement about you more so than the culture of the company or the CEO. Yep. I think that's also important. I would suspect that was a contributing factor, whether you were aware of that or not. Derrick, again, we are up against the time limit I've asked you for, actually a little bit longer, so I appreciate your patience and your insights. The final question is the one every guest gets, and it's, you can answer this in whichever context you choose to answer it, and the question is very simple, and that is, what's the point?
Well, for me, the point is I want to share my experience. I want people to understand that I've been through some crazy things. That doesn't make me unique. Everybody's been through crazy things personally and professionally, and I write the book because people said to me, and I wrote the book because people said to me, Derrick, how did you do that? And I wanted people to understand I'm not special. The book is designed to give people framework for what figure it out means and how do you apply that personally and professionally in your own life. I'm not a motivational speaker that flies over the country and does these things. I'm just a normal person you might bump into at a baseball game. But I think my perspective is helpful for a lot of people, and the feedback so far has been great. So the goal in this and anything else is to hopefully share that message and give somebody an outlet. And if I can be that person to anybody, and I say this to everybody, if I can help in any way, if you need a sounding board, somebody who's been through it, find my website, derrickgirard.com, reach out to me, and I promise you I will do everything I can to be that resource.
Outstanding. Derrick Girard, author of the book, Put to the Test, which you can find wherever books are sold. All of his information also is in the show notes. Derrick, thank you for sharing your time and your insights. And I'm just so excited because I really believe listeners are going to gain some terrific insight from you today and have the opportunity to improve their lives and the lives around them. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it, Bill.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise there is value to be gained in every one. Taking a second to rate, review, and share the show helps make us more discoverable and enables others to find out what's the point. If you'd like to learn more about Bill Ellis and his services, please visit his website, billellis.com. See you next time.